Hello, everyone. Hi, Katie. Hi, Arthur. Hi, Lee. How are you all doing?
Great. How are you?
Doing well. Doing well. I'm definitely kind of enjoying this gloomy weather right now in LA, I have to say. I know people are always like, what? But I actually kind of like it when it's gloomy and it's getting a bit colder because it has been super hot. We've been experiencing that heat wave. And with no air conditioning, it's been a little tough, but
Same here in Atlanta. We're gloomy today here in Atlanta as well. So we're
oh
joining you in the gloomy weather.
you're joining. Oh, I love it. Is it also, how's the temperature?
Temperature, it's normal in the 80s, but it's rainy today, which is kind of a nice relief, kind
Yeah.
of wipe down, all the residue and everything that has been around for quite a while. And
Yeah.
just feels very fresh right now.
Oh, amazing. And how about you, Arthur? I know you're in SF. The air quality you said was a little bit better.
Yeah, it's better and it's getting cooler.
Good.
So I'm thankful for that. It's been held. Like you said, there's no AC.
Yeah.
Unbearable.
Unbearable. I'm like, wake up and I'm like, oh my God, I feel like I've been in a coma. And it's like, oh, because of the heat, I'm just like, my brain kind of turns off.
Yeah, totally.
Melting. What about you, Lee?
It's the same, a little gloomy, but we'll take it. South Carolina's kind of known for the, real intense heat during the summer. So anything to just, all we have right now is just decent weather and sitting on our porch. So, always hoping for a good weather day.
Good. Amazing. Well, folks who are joining in, I always love to see where everyone is coming in from. So please drop in the chat box at the bottom of your screen where you're coming in from. We want to see where you guys are all located. And thank you all again for being here. Thank you so much for being present with us today as we dive into the conversation on how to advance racial justice in the workplace. Joining us today is Lee Days from Obviously Marketing and co-founder of Agencies Act in Solidarity. Days has built a career on her entrepreneurial spirit and passion for boldness. She founded Obviously in 2005 with the goal of breaking the agency mold and making marketing more valuable for clients, creators, and communities. Her involvement in countless organizations during her career is rooted in her mission to bring people together to drive change and create social good. We also have Katie Kern from Media Frenzy Global and co-founder of Agencies Act in Solidarity. An innate storyteller and strategic creative, Kern is driven by two passions: building bold brands and developing tomorrow's creative leaders. As partner of Media Frenzy Global and co-founder of Act in Solidarity, Kern drives business growth and advocates a go-there mindset in all that she does. Lastly, we have Arthur Chan, a DEI strategist with a background in clinical psychology and demonstrated experiences in developing, operationalizing, and evaluating DEI initiatives, policies, and programs. Chan is dedicated to making a positive impact on organizations and individuals by focusing on intersectionality, cultivating a workplace culture of inclusion and belonging, and facilitating equitable and sustainable changes. So wow, thank you, incredible panelists. Thank you guys for being present with us today. I'm so excited for this conversation, and thank you for the folks who are here. Friendly reminder, we want to hear from you, so utilize the chat box and also the Q&A box, and we will get to questions at the end. So my first kind of question, general, very big question for all of you is, how is systemic racism hindering the advancement of Black, Indigenous people of color? Why don't we start first with you, Lee?
I like how you just started with like the heaviest question.
The heaviest thing. That's, yep, we're gonna go heavy.
After it, Madeline,
yeah.
Let's go right in.
I'm gonna tell everyone, wake up, you're here, you're present, let's go.
Well, I feel like we could definitely talk about this one topic for the length of this, whole entire session, but I'll just say, even thinking about our own organization as we go through hiring practices, often see that, there's a default setting to kind of surround yourself by people who maybe look like you, act like you, share the same pop culture references, whatever that might be. And, I think there's a lot of people who haven't necessarily fully identified that there is a system that's in place that continues to support, you know, especially there's so much talk right now, you know, even more so than before about white privilege. And I notice that even just sometimes our bias in watching our team members, if they go to hire a contractor, if we go to bring on internship programs, it's really easy to default to the, oh, I know so-and-so from when I was in college or from my last job, and not to break down that system. And so, you know, that's just one of a myriad of ways that we could, you know, talk about today.
Thank you so much, Lee. Katie, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I think these moments in time are, it's kind of like 400 years in the making. Right now, we're dealing with the shooting of, Jacob Blake, who was shot, 7 times in the back by, with the witnessing of his 3 young boys. They're right there in the car. So, by these officers, and right now, police reform, that's really important right now. And I think that a lot of people don't realize that this hinders, people of color, especially Black people, from actually performing at their best, within the work environment. Having that heavy load of these systems that are in place that weren't meant to actually include you, that has stopped us from actually performing sometimes, especially when there's, immediately moments like this happening in time. And then also the systems that are in place that just have not been broken down, to help us, succeed within the workplace. So I think that it's really about taking time to not really look at, this as a moment in time, but this is really about systems that have been created and need to be broken down to actually help people of color to be successful and there be equality across the board.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Katie. Arthur?
Yeah, I totally agree with Lee and Katie. I feel like the other thing that systemic racism kind of hindered the advancement of Black and Indigenous people, in the sense that a lot of organizations still kind of focus on culture fit, right? Like they want people to fit into the culture, but they don't really think about how the individual, particularly like Black, Indigenous people, how they can, actually contribute to like the culture change within the organization. And even within the organization itself, there are a lot of systemic biases within, right? For example, like they don't really take complaints of people of color or underrepresented folks seriously, in terms of like promotion criteria, performance review. They're always kind of tend to be not so transparent. And and in terms of like promotion opportunities, a lot of the time, people of color, particularly Black and brown folks, they don't really have access, in terms of how I can actually advance like in the workplace, what kind of, tangible things that I can work on, to get to where I want to be. So these are the things that I felt like is kind of like hindering the development of Black and brown employees in general.
Absolutely. And what are some steps that we can take to kind of identify, looking into the workplace, identify bias and microaggressions of Black, Indigenous people of color? Arthur, if you want to start, and then...
I think that's a good question. I think there are actually 2 levels, because it's like, I know for a lot of organization, they kind of look into, hey, let's do it unconscious bias training, have everyone sit together and talk about, how our bias like kind of affects us as an individual, or like how it affects the organization or the society as a whole. But I feel like a lot of the time when we talk about unconscious bias training, because it's kind of target individual thinking style and kind of challenge their bias and stereotypes, it's a good start. I mean, it's good for people, to be more aware of their thinking, of their behavior. But at the same time, we also have to be kind of realistic that like not everyone is susceptible to change. Not everyone is receptive, to new experience, or they're open-minded enough to, to kind of challenge their beliefs. So from an individual level, it's good to have this kind of training and kind of provide them with some sort of like, skills and techniques on how to, examine your own bias and how to address, stuff like microaggressions. But I feel like what is more important is like, as an organization, how the leadership actually kind of examine what they've been doing and what they have done that kind of help perpetuate, racial inequities within the organization. And I feel like there should be policies that directly address these biases. Otherwise, we can't wait till everyone within the organization to be on the same page and be like, okay, like now everyone is educated, now everyone is woke, and now we can move forward and do all this DEI stuff. I feel like there has to be a balance, and I feel like we also have to start from break it down to individual and organizational level, and to have them start at the same time.
Absolutely. And before I have Katie and then Lee answer as well, you make such a great point, because it's easy to kind of look at a company and be like, oh, look at the DEI initiatives that they have in place. But often it's like that needs to be like every employee, everyone needs to have that same training. It shouldn't just be the managers. It go every step, every single person that's involved in that organization should have that training, so that it almost shouldn't be a separate thing. It should encompass the entire company. Katie, what else do you have to add for steps to identify bias and microaggressions?
Yeah, I think it really does come to moving beyond good intentions, because I think that there's so many people that say, and I've heard people say before, they're like, I'm not racist. And it's, and I would never want to offend someone. And people don't really understand what microaggressions are. I mean, we all have biases, every single one of us, but there's certain things and behaviors that we exhibit that we do have to take into consideration and actually check at the door. So for me, it's really about, creating those, policies and processes, to build an inclusive workforce, because if you don't, then those same microaggressions that you are actually kind of spewing out of your mouth on a regular basis is going to damage that person. And I want to make sure that people are clear that word micro, it means small, but the impact of that day to day is powerful. If you're coming into a work environment and you're really spewing out things that you're not even conscious of, that is hurtful to someone, could be a very massive impact on that person's mental capacity. And I think that needs to be checked from the top down.
Thank you so much. Lee, do you have anything?
Yeah, so well said by both of you. And, just kind of reiterating Arthur's point too about leadership. And I think so much of it does have to come with leading from a place of vulnerability. Kind of gone are the days where we look up to these CEOs and individuals who are, leading from this very corporate power suit, and I have, figured everything out. And now the leaders that we all, I think, really connect with and look up to in many worlds are the ones that are coming out with much more openness and vulnerability, and kind of willing to say, hey, I didn't get this one thing fully right, and we're working on it. And, I know just from our own efforts that I had to kind of sit with, okay, let's get real about what we have done well and what we haven't done well. And then I have to be very open with our team about, hey, there's lots of areas that are, we have a lot of room to grow, and we need to act quickly. So I would just say, that again, vulnerability for all, and creating a workplace where vulnerability is encouraged, and also the ability to say, hey, I got something wrong. But I'm here today because I want to fix it. And then also just the point about having to do it as a group. I myself went through a diversity leadership training. It was about a 6-month program. It was really great. I came out, I went in thinking, I already know this world, like I got it. I came out realizing, nope, I didn't. I just learned so much, but I didn't go through it with my team. So then coming back and then starting to try to implement those things, it was, the dots didn't fully connect. So then now we're going through all these education systems and trainings together as a collective, so that we're all along for the same journey. And then, people who might be more extroverted and willing to ask certain questions are more comfortable, but introverted folks might be able to benefit, from that. And then now we're just sort of sharing and growing together as a collective and getting there as one unit.
Incredible. Before I go into the next question, actually, the organization, do you mind saying, in case for people who are interested in maybe doing that themselves for their company right now, what is the organization you're going through?
Sure. The one that I went through, it was a state-based program here that was run by a college, but I highly recommend Racial Equity Institute, which is which is a national program, and you can do these 2-day programs that are about the education of and just learning about the history of systemic racism and how we got to where we are. And there's tons of add-ons so that you can continue to go through all the phases with the programs, and I believe they have them in most states.
Perfect. Thank you so much. For those who are tuning in, check it out, please. So now I want to go into kind of the hiring and retention practices. Katie, how do you ensure that Black, Indigenous people of color, they're not being treated as what people deem like the token candidates?
Yeah, I think that starts with building a better hiring and retention processes, because 9 times out of 10, if you have a Black employee that works within your company, you did not recruit them. They actually applied online, or whatever your process is, and they went through the interviewing process. You probably did not seek them out, unless it was for, you know, a particular role, but 9 times out of 10, that person actually was seeking you out. I think you have to expand your, you know, sourcing strategy and discovering your Black talent. I know that there has been this huge movement on, you know, making sure that people who have not been able to identify Black talent in the past, it's been, you know, the go-to has always been, you know, go to the HBCUs, and there's lots of talent there. But I really encourage people to just kind of just expand past that, because that's just one avenue. There's so many ways to reach out to Black talent, and that is expanding your resources. And that's really get involved in different organizations, you know, that are dedicated, you know, to Black professionals, and just really making an effort to connect. I think that everyone could see through companies or organizations that their intentions are to go after Black talent, and that feels like tokenism when you actually go into those spaces seeking out people strictly because you have not met a quota. And I think that's very unfair to those candidates, because when they do come within your environment, if it's not set up for success for them, you will lose them. And then that's where your retention comes into place. So make sure that you're being really intentional about, you know, identifying, you know, who the talent are, and that strategy, that pipeline of talent has to come through different resources and not just one resource.
Thank you so much for going through the process. And that kind of even goes back to Arthur, when you made the comment of like not hiring your friend, or hiring, like really being intentional and genuine about the process, and going beyond your microcosm. Lee, when someone says that there is not a deep talent pipeline for Black, Indigenous people of color, specifically Black talent, how do you guide them in the right direction?
This is something that we're trying to learn and grow in this area. So by no means am I saying that I'm an expert, but some things that, you know, we've started to put together that have been extremely helpful. One, just having conversations with other companies and agencies, and, you know, learning what has been successful, getting more personal introductions if we are, you know, trying to work with HBCUs or, you know, African American organizations, other colleges, having that more personal connect and being very clear that we are not looking for like a temporary fix. We're looking for an overall like long-term change and a long-term relationship. And there's so many different amazing websites. You know, I can only speak for like the marketing industry, and especially for creatives and designers. There's a great Twitter account, Slack channels, and so forth on how to connect with Black designers. And it's great because, you know, you have a lot of people posting portfolios, and then you have a lot of people posting jobs, and it's created this, you know, more of a matchmaking opportunity. And same thing goes for, you know, all industries. If you just do, you know, a Google search, you'll probably uncover lots of other, you know, sites, and just starting to get out of the overall like, oh great, we're just going to post this to LinkedIn and see who comes, and then, you know, move forward. And we also started reaching out to very specific candidates and just saying, you know, we'd love for you to apply to our organization, and having, and that just goes across, you know, like all humans. Like we want to make sure that that we're reaching out to people directly instead of just seeing kind of who comes in our door. And so, you know, I recommend that, you know, people really start to build relationships that might turn into future hires instead of just waiting, creating a position and posting it and just seeing what comes, because if that's the process, well, you'll probably, you know, find that you'll always be recruiting the exact same people, and it kind of perpetuates itself.
Thank you. Thank you all. My next question is for Arthur. How do you help Black employees stay happy and thrive within the workplace?
I think there are several things that we can do. For example, I oftentimes encourage managers and leaders to kind of give Black employees proper and public credit for their work, because a lot of times these things are kind of overworked and they oftentimes take it for granted. I feel like that's recognition is particularly important. The other thing is provide more budget and resources to the Inclusion Council or the Black ERG, because they are actually the people doing the work a lot of the time. They are actually the group that actually pull, like, you know, kind of the Black employees together, you know, to kind of talk through, like, you know, their wants, their needs, their struggles, and how, like, they can actually, you know, what they need the organization to support them so that they can, you know, actually do their work. I feel like that's another piece that people can look into. I also are, you know, an advocate for like you know, a more inclusive, transparent, intentional performance review and promotion practices, because there are a lot of research kind of point towards race display, like, you know, a big difference in terms of performance review. For example, white folks are more likely to get, you know, feedback that they can tangibly work on, you know, to improve on, but people of color tend to be, you know, receiving feedback that kind of more related to the personality. For example, tune it down, you know, don't be so loud, don't be so angry, smile more, you know, be more friendly, you know, comments like that, something that, you know, the person cannot immediately work on, and it's just so abstract, right? You don't even know where to start. So that's the other thing that we can think about. I also feel like the other thing is, as an organization, you know, from, you know, leadership or as managers, we kind of have, or even as, you know, just coworkers, we kind of have to actively reach out to, you know, Black and brown employees, ask them, you know, if they need any help, you know, if there are any wants, any needs, any concern, any struggles, and ask them what we can do as an organization to support them. I feel like that's the other thing that is really important, is to kind of open the communication. Not to make assumptions about what they need and what they want. We actually have to ask, right? We don't have, you know, telepathy. We can't, you know, immediately think what the other person wants. So a lot of the time we have to ask questions, and we have to, you know, kind of be prepared. Sometimes, you know, once you started a conversation, it might not be comfortable. It might not be something that you want to hear, but, you know, kind of prepare yourself for that. Because a lot of the time when we talk about, you know, racial equity or how we can support underrepresented folks within the organization, a lot of negative feelings come up, especially with underrepresented folks, because of the lived experience, because of, you know, what they've been through in the workplace. So we kind of have to be open to that, you know, with, like, you know, being non-judgmental and really listen and really try to open your mind, you know, and listen to their lived experience and think about what we can do, you know, as an individual or as an organization to better support them. Yeah.
I wanted to piggyback off of Arthur, because I think there needs to be an important statement that's made, because there, you can have all the resources and all the support, but if the culture and the company is already broken and it's not going to change, the environment's never going to change. You know, it always seems like there is, let's see how we can support them and help them through, when the company actually needs to change itself and work on itself and, like, really adjust to the people that they're actually bringing into an environment that it wasn't built for. So there's a lot of change that I think a lot of companies need to look inward and not try to keep asking the questions, what can I do for you? What resources can I give to you? But say to each other, hey, you know, we are bringing in different people that need to make sure that they're comfortable within this environment. And currently right now, this environment is not conducive to them to thrive and be successful. I think that's really important.
Right.
Absolutely. And that kind of goes to the point where it's like, it's not a separate thing. No one should, like, DI initiatives or creating that safe space shouldn't just be for just someone. It should be a holistic experience. It should be, and even as someone who is an advocate or ally, they should not be okay with the broken culture like that. And I think that's conversations that are happening now where it's like, this is not just a fight for Black, Indigenous, people of color. This is where we all together collectively need to ensure that we're creating a safe and supportive space. And that's why I think it's so importantly, to your point of having that training and having it where even just as you as the manager, you ensure that your whole company gets that training and kind of goes through that experience themselves. And yeah, I think that's really super important.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to add that we brought on a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant who's been incredible. And I really respected that from the beginning. She said two things. Number one, I'm not going to sign on with you if this is like 1 month or 2 months. I want to make sure, we're working together for a long time, which, we were ready to do. But I love that she said, that's not even an option. And number two, that the way that she built out the education and the program, that we spend a few months just on systemic racism, understanding of terms, and then working together to have conversations about culture and how we enter, new individuals into the organization, how that would be received, and then talking out, how it is now versus where we want to be and how we're going to be there before we get into the conversation about HR and recruiting and so forth. And, it's so important, Katie and Arthur already made this point, but it's also making sure that we don't bring individuals in and then ask them to assimilate and to ask people to have like a culture fit, but to figure out how to bring in, new voices and new talent and to make sure that we're learning and growing from them. And especially, depending on what fields people are in, like we're in marketing. And so it's really important. There's an added responsibility of like, what are we putting out to the world?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all. And I hope everyone these are really good tips, especially if people right now are looking at creating their company right now or are in a company or are going to have this conversation with their manager after. So thank you. So my next question is for you, Katie. If someone is the only Black person on a team, how do they address systemic racism and racial justice when it is only them on an all white team?
It's so easy to say, call it out when you see it, but I know that there is a fear that if you do say something, you will be, scrutinized, or you're going to be kind of the person who's bringing grief to the company when that's not exactly what you're doing. I'll give you an example. So I know that the young lady who was a part of Pepsi, who put out the commercial with Kendall Jenner, yeah. Everyone was so offended by actually having that sort of Black Lives Matter movement with this individual who no one sees as someone who is ever spoken out about Black rights, or even have any remote kind of association with the organization at all. And that was a bad move by Pepsi. But the one Black person that was in the room, she said that she was afraid to say something because if she did, of course millions of dollars would have been lost, and she did not want to be the person who was going to say, you know what, this is not the right thing to do. And it happens in so many environments and so many different industries where when you are the only one, you're afraid to speak up. And to those of us who are in those positions, I encourage you to, speak up in those moments. It doesn't have to be a conflict whatsoever. It's just like, I know that this is not going to resonate because of this, and give examples of why it's not going to work, why it is offensive. And maybe even going a step further and saying, you know what, let me wait and talk to leadership and see what their take is on that. You always want to get the buy-in, from your leadership team, that, you're not trying to, make anyone's life uncomfortable, but it is important to make sure that you have the confidence to actually speak out when you see these injustices happening within any environment across any industry.
Absolutely. And that goes to your point of the culture, right? Because if you're in a company where you feel like you're trying to Lee's point, like assimilate, or it's not a culture fit, it's like, then how are you able to actually do your work well? How are you actually able to show up and, you know, and do your, and have, do your work well? So it's like, it goes back to creating a safe and supportive culture, and making sure that people don't feel like they can't raise their voice or speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
So diving more into workplace culture, we did touch on this with microaggressions, but Arthur, I'd love for you to kind of dive in deeper with the growing sentiment that the term microaggression is mislabeled. Can you talk through why these subtle messages can actually have a lasting impact?
Yeah, of course. So microaggression, originally it's kind of a term used to describe some sort of brief and everyday verbal and non-verbal behaviors, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate some sort of bias, prejudice, hostility, or insult towards culturally marginalized groups. So the term initially is served for this purpose to kind of differentiate it from outright racism or outright discrimination, to kind of illustrate that as some more like a minor act. But the thing is, because it's so quote unquote minor, people tend to overlook it and tend to ignore it. They don't really take these kind of offensive behaviors seriously. So for example, presuming that, a Black person is dangerous or violent is one of the classic example of microaggression, right? A common experience that, Black men talk about is being followed around in stores, or getting on an elevator and having people move away and grabbing their purse and their wallet. So other example is, for example, someone commenting on how well an Asian American speaks English, which presumably, Asian American was not born here. So these are all the examples of microaggression. It doesn't sound like a big deal. It's not like, I'm calling name or making like racial slurs, but these things don't just happen, once or twice. For people within the marginalized, underrepresented communities, these are the things that they encounter every so often, quite frequently, to be frank. So when we talk about, microaggression, the prefix micro actually does not imply that the aggression is minor or insignificant, right? Even though a statement or an action may appear to be subtle or unintentional or often downplayed, it does cause both short-term and long-term adverse consequences to the recipient's psyche and well-being, just like overt aggression. The other thing is these subtle messages actually accumulate over time. And the recipients could potentially internalize all these derogatory remarks, which could lead to self-doubt, kind of affect their sense of self, influence how they position themselves in society or in the workplace, and it could potentially cause traumatization and re-traumatization. If they listen to like the same derogatory remarks or like so quote unquote unintentional acts. So these things, they do kind of affect the person in the long run. So if you want to dive deeper into microaggression and its like long-term consequences, I encourage you to look at a psychological phenomenon called self-fulfilling prophecy. So basically, just put it simply, it's like if a group of people were repeatedly told that they will not be able to achieve a goal, and they believe they won't be able to achieve the goal, and as such, they stop working towards the goal. And as a result, they fail to achieve the goal. So a lot of the time for people of color or marginalized communities, one of the things that microaggressions have on them is that they might internalize what people say. And they kind of, start kind of questioning their own abilities, and that directly affects their performance in the workplace. So, or how they see themselves. So, so I get that why people feel that microaggressions is like a kind of like a mislabel, kind of like a misnomer, because it kind of sends up the signal to other people that are not sensitive about like, hey, these are just microaggression. It's no biggie. It's so micro. It doesn't even worth, you know, talking about it. But I felt like it's our responsibility, you know, as a society to kind of come together and say, hey, you know, it's just because it's called microaggressions, it does have a huge impact. And we have to you know, take it seriously. Just like in the workplace, right? Like oftentimes HR would say to people, oh, it's just microaggression. No, you know, he didn't mean it or she didn't mean it. And then you kind of downplay the entire thing. But you can't just do that, right? Because it's like one of the things that a lot of underrepresented folks, especially Black and Brown employees that have been experiencing are these kind of day-to-day harassment. And when you report to HR just kind of like, oh God, you're just being sensitive. You know, you're just like thinking too much. You're just reading too much into it. By that, you are actually creating kind of, you know, you're kind of creating a toxic environment, right? Like, okay, your concerns, your complaints don't count, especially, you know, because you're a person of color, who knows, right? So I don't take your complaint seriously. So I feel like as an organization, the leader kind of have to set the tone and say, hey, microaggression, you know, it might sound micro, but we take it seriously, and kind of tell people what microaggressions look like, you know, kind of lay out like what inclusive versus exclusive behavior look like, and actually equip people with the skill on how to deal with microaggression. I feel like that is very important because we talk a lot about training, but training, you know, if you just kind of confine yourself into like everyone sitting together, feeling guilty, cry over it, and like, oh my God, I feel so guilty, you know, I didn't know, you know, I was part of a problem. That wouldn't lead to any change, right? So if you really want to lead sustainable change, I feel like the leadership has to, you know, kind of set the example, you know, lead by example, and they also have to provide ongoing training or even bite-sized learning moment, you know, for everyone in the organization to learn new skills on how to tackle these situations.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I think you make such a great point. And Katie made this point as well. Micro creates macro impact. And that's something that people sometimes just think, again, it's like micro, it's little, it's like, but it adds, it builds. And it's also not just in the workplace, it's in their personal lives. It's like you said, it's in the grocery store. It's in, so that accumulates and becomes, goes into macro and yeah, dangerous kind of macro impact. So I know we kind of talked about, you know, the issue of hiring people like you. Lee, I just wanted you to kind of go over that a bit more of like why this can be an issue when you do hire your friends or someone where you went to school with them or some, like why it's an issue if you go into your kind of like pool of people that you know, and what are some ways, I know we talked about like going outside of that, but maybe what are some ways, you know, specifically for a company right now, if they were going to go and start the hiring process next week, that they could kind of follow?
Sure. Well, one thing that I read not too long ago that just really stuck to me was that people oftentimes, when they're hiring for a support position, they're unconsciously looking for a younger version of themselves to give them the shot that they wish that they would have gotten. And that just really stuck with me. And I know I can reflect on my own hiring experiences and see times where I most likely did exactly that without realizing it. And what our, as we were talking this out with our, you know, DEI coach that we were working with, you know, she made a good point of like, they're going to get a shot. They're fun. You can let them go. And just starting to think about when hiring, how not to look for yourself and to look for someone potentially who's polar opposite of you or is bringing a whole bunch of new things to the table. And that the article also said that oftentimes if you're hiring for a lateral or senior level position, you're looking for shared interest, you know, thinking, okay, well, this is someone who I might be spending a lot of time with, potentially traveling and so forth. And, you know, we don't realize sometimes how much, you know, maybe even just bonding over the same type of music or a TV show or something like that weighed into your decision to bring that person on the team. And I think it's just first getting, you know, kind of clearing out the, you know, biases, like Kate said, that we all have, that we all bring to the table, and, you know, some on, you know, much stronger levels, and just, you know, thinking that through before even walking into the room for the interview process. And of course, just making sure that there's a wide variety of individuals that you're, you know, speaking to as well. Something that we started to, you know, think about more too is just, you know, that cultural piece, like what does fitting into culture mean, you know, and really defining culture more as like core values that we're, you know, looking for in individuals that would, you know, be a fit that could go across, you know, all races, all sexual orientation, all gender, and so forth, and really honing more in on that, but also making sure that our different teams are thinking about diverse personalities on their teams as well. Like what we don't want is to have very similar personalities. What we do want is to have a bunch of people who think and act and react in very different ways, so that we're looking at things from all angles and we're producing the best work. I always love to steal something from the software industry, which is a team should be a hacker and a hipster and a hustler. And it's like thinking in terms more of best teams are not made of like individuals, and best work doesn't come from that. So not only is it the right thing to do, it's the imperative thing to do, but also it's a better work product at the end of the day as well, because everyone's bringing their own culture and experiences and opinions and nuances to the work.
Absolutely. Thank you. I love that. The three personalities. So my next question is for you, Katie. This is for someone like if someone is wanting to kind of look at the company, the culture that they've created, and almost like a check-in to like really see what is the culture they've created and what are some changes they need to do. How is it, like almost like a check-in? What would you say the process of that would look like, and what's a like a helpful way to go about that?
So I know a lot of companies have done this as of late, and I know that the numbers do matter. You have to, you know, really pull that data together. And I tell people to start with a survey, do an internal survey, you know, with your team, you know, starting with, you know, from the top down, you know, make sure that you look at the executive team. What does your board look like? What are the entry level, management level positions look like? So you do that assessment so you can see where you are. There's no way you can move forward with a proper plan of action until you know what the benchmarks are. So I actually had an individual that reached out to me, and she was, you know, looked at her numbers and wanted to put together a plan. And she was pretty embarrassed of where her company was actually sitting at that very moment. And she said, you know, she was shocked that they didn't have, you know, they weren't far along as they wanted to be, but she said that, you know, Black people didn't necessarily come and actually apply for the jobs within her company. And, you know, I looked at her website and I'm like, there you go. You know, everyone that's on your team, there's no diversity whatsoever. And you have to think about, if people are actively seeking an opportunity, they want to go where they're going to feel comfortable. And, you know, so of course the images on your website, you know, on your social media, you know, when you're able to see like what the company culture looks like, what are you doing for activities? If it doesn't necessarily gel or mesh with that person's culture or personality, and that doesn't mean, you know, in February, you know, you celebrate Black History Month or Martin Luther King Day. It really has to be about what are you doing 365, and making sure that your, you know, your culture is really conducive to anyone if they came into that environment. So I think it's really important for, you know, companies to look at those diversified numbers and work towards, you know, getting them to a place where, you know, it's acceptable. You know, and once those, you know, I know a lot of people posted a lot of Black squares, you know, when what happened with George Floyd, but what are you doing now? What are you doing post, you know, the Black square? That really does matter, and people are paying attention to that.
Absolutely, and this goes perfectly into the next, more of like topic of discussion, but can we talk about how racism and being anti-racist is not an issue for only Black people to end? And I want to start with you, Katie, and then we'll go to Arthur and then Lee.
Absolutely. So, I mean, if you look at statistics, of course, Black people make up 13% of the US population. And of course, there are allies that are needed to dismantle racism. There's no way that Black people can do it alone or want to do it alone. So, we need to make sure that racism is not looked at as a political kind of issue, it is a human rights issue. And once everyone is on that same page, I think that there's a greater way for us to move forward, where we all feel like we're making an impact towards one common goal.
Thank you so much. Arthur?
I think Katie definitely hit the nail on the head. I would add that just think about all the civil rights movement and all the rights that we have right now. I always say to my Asian folks, like, it matters to us too. It's important that we stand in solidarity. It's important that, we advocate for our Black sisters and brothers, because if it weren't for them, we wouldn't be enjoying the freedom that we have right now. Especially as a gay man myself, I feel like I owe it to, a group of like Black and brown LGBTQ advocates back in the days, even during Stonewall. Those people who were at the front line, confronting the police, chanting and being kind of like a, human roadblocks, and everything. They are people of color. They're not necessarily my tribes, they're not necessarily Asians, but they are people of color. And all this like historical, civil movements kind of let us know we are stronger together. I know it sounds really cliche, but we are stronger together and we are better together. And it's our responsibility as society to kind of look into these issues. Like Katie said, it's not just like, an issue of Black people. It's not like a business case. It's not something, political. It's just a basic, very fundamental human rights, a very fundamental premise of our existence, right? Is to kind of everyone, to be equal. Everyone is born equal. It's just that simple. And I feel like people need to be aware of that, not to kind of dilute the message and kind of, mix in like all these different noises. Just stay focused. What we're addressing here, you might call it BLM, or call it whatever you want, but what we're really focusing here is how we can create an environment where everyone, have equitable treatment, where everyone have the equal opportunity and access to succeed. I feel like that's the important message that we have to be aware of.
Thank you. Emily?
Well, it's hard to add on to that, but I would just say that, it's definitely a white problem as well, considering we created the problem. So it's our responsibility to unravel the problem. And I think the first thing is to go back and get the education in the way that we all didn't get properly in schools, and really understand the history of systemic racism and what all those, the infrastructure that was created, these different environments that were created on purpose to create an advantage, and to start to take all that down. And, I think that what we're hopefully seeing now, and a lot of the discussion, especially, since George Floyd, but that was kind of happening, is now having a much bigger way. It is just this movement from the I'm not racist to what anti-racism is. And the way I've kind of defined it in my head is like, not being racist is thoughts and prayers. Like, oh, I'm not racist, and now I'm going about my day because I'm fine. And then anti-racism is screaming and sacrifices and saying, no, I have to take part in this battle. I have to move from, standing in solidarity and saying that my thoughts and intentions are here, and moving into extreme action, and feeling, that pressure, that self-pressure to get up every day and push it faster and harder.
Thank you. So as a business owner, Lee, how and why did you make the decision to want to fight racial injustices?
Well, it's definitely a part of my core individually, and for a lot of the individuals in our organization, you know, I can see from interacting with them on a day-to-day basis, what they're posting on Instagram and so forth, that it was something that everyone is very passionate about being a part of, but we were all doing it on a very individual level and not on a collective level and not as a business. So, you know, it was a good opportunity to to work with a lot of really incredible individuals who might be on an individual plate and to figure out how we can have a much bigger impact as a company. And I think the wake up call, and, you know, I'm embarrassed to admit that it took this moment in time to really, you know, get moving. We've had, you know, diversity and inclusion policies. We've, you know, we've really been mindful of those practices, but to really get in and say, no, we need a massive, complete overhaul and complete evaluation and complete vulnerability really came a few months ago. And that was when, you know, as a lot of peaceful protests around the country were turning into certain cities had riots, we were one of them. And I'm in Charleston, South Carolina. My business is right on the main street where it happened. And what was interesting that day is that though a lot of these restaurants and hotels were in COVID and they were at the, you know, the bottom financially and, you know, already in this really challenging, like, can we even make it spot, when some of the buildings were violated that evening, the next morning when I came in to help neighbors and friends clean, not one business owner that I talked to had anything to say about, I can't believe this happened. Pretty much the message across the board was, we stand fully with our Black employees and our Black community and can understand that there's such pain and anger and how the world has gotten to this point, that that's where we are today. And the world and the media told a completely different message of, you know, what happened. And it was all the scrutiny on the individuals that, you know, had violated the buildings and so forth, but that was not the message of the business community. And so that was just a wake-up call for me, twofold. One, the power of marketing and media, and the fact that we are an, you know, organization that can help be a part of telling stories and amplifying the right stories. Watching the wrong story be told was very frustrating, and I knew that we had an opportunity to correct that and that we could tell the appropriate one, the one that was real, of what the business community felt. And also just, I remember just coming and sitting in the same conference room I'm in right now and just getting very real with myself of what are we doing? Like, yes, lots of great thoughts, lots of great intention, lots of great, you know, conversations, but what could I really point to within our organization? What could I really point to that we do within the community? What could I really point to that we do in the industry? And I was coming up pretty empty in terms of tangibles. You know, again, lots of all the emotionally ready, but did not have a great plan of action items to get there. And so, you know, hammered out a quick just base of a plan of, okay, here's some things that we can do now, and then worked with some team members and built on it. And then Katie and I have been friends for years, and then called, you know, Katie, and we just started talking about, where's the world, where's our industry, what is happening. And, you know, I asked her if she wouldn't mind looking at the plan, telling us where, you know, what are the gaps, what are the major blind spots. And she came back with some amazing feedback, and that's what, a lot of what led to us forming Act in Solidarity. And that, you know, okay, well, let's take the tools and resources we already have, and that's the hardest point for a lot of people, and distribute that and work together instead of, you know, working in these silos and taking a lot longer to get there, because Lord knows we've all had way too much time to get to this point, that now we got to expedite and, you know, and rock out this next phase, as Katie said, and really get moving.
Thank you so much. And the concept of moving away from, like you said, intention into action, into actionable steps, goes into my next question for Arthur, which is, what can allies do to really show up and provide an anti-racist culture?
I feel like for an individual level, again, examine your own bias and really think about how you as an individual have contributed to perpetuating systemic racism and racial inequities. I feel like self-examination, introspections is always important as a start. And then the other thing is, as an ally, if you see something, say something, you know, speak up against racism, because silence allows oppression to continue, right? We all know that. So it's kind of beyond, you know, just like, you know, saying, oh yeah, Black Lives Matter. But, you know, when something happened, I just, you know, kind of stand aside and just let it happen. You know, it really is also about what kind of actions you're taking, you know, to make real change. Also, the other thing, in terms of like, for example, within the organization, in terms of promoting like a more inclusive and anti-racist culture, I feel like what's important is that we kind of, you know, I know oftentimes we talk a lot about calling people out, right? But at the same time, it's not to say it's not important to call people out. I think it's important, you know, especially to kind of address it here and now. But after we call people out, we also have to think about how we can call people in. Of course, it's not to say like everyone, you know, is open-minded or everyone, you know, is willing to change. But we also have to have that in mind. You know, if we really truly want to create an inclusive culture, that means everyone has to make an effort. You know, for people, you know, if they're like hardcore racist or, you know, or they're like kind of the repeated offenders, right? Then there has to be punishment, right? Like it could be, you know, just terminate the person or any other, you know, legal actions or whatever. But as a whole, I would believe that like some people, they might have a good intention, but, you know, whatever they say or do like come across, you know, offensive. But don't get me wrong, I am truly believe that, you know, impacts matter more than intention. But that said, some people, they actually just need the opportunity or they need the skills, you know, to be a better ally or accomplice or anti-racist. So we cannot overlook that part, because what we want to do is kind of promote a growth-oriented culture rather than, you know, this person just call this person out, you know, and just keep on going, because it's going nowhere. It would just keep on calling people out, but without actually, you know, kind of come together and think about how we can grow together as an organization, or how can I help my other co-workers who are not as woke to be more woke. So I feel like this is the thing that we can do, you know, as allies.
Love that, a growth-oriented culture, calling people in. Katie, how do we make solidarity not what we say, but what we do?
I think one of the things that Lee and I made sure that when we started out with the Act in Solidarity pledge was to make sure that we were past the stand in solidarity phase and moved forward with the Act in Solidarity, which is the action. So it's time to take action to everything that you think, you know, you want to move forward with. It really does take everyone, you know, just like Lee said, we love your thoughts and prayers. We really do, and we need your thoughts and prayers. But after all of that, you shouldn't go back to business as usual. It's not the time for that. It really is an opportunity for companies to really look internally, start reassessing, you know, what's happening, not just within your culture, but what's happening in the world. There's so much turmoil that's happening right now that's causing all of this. And we have to make sure that we are being intentional and we're being conscious about the actions that we're taking. So we encourage, you know, companies, large or small, come up with some sort of plan, put a plan in place, and just start acting on that now. It's not easy. You don't have all the answers. None of us have all the answers, but it is an opportunity for us to take accountability for our actions and take it one step further to making sure that there's equality across the board for all people and individuals within your company.
Absolutely. Thank you. Wow, on that powerful statement, I am going to now actually present the Act in Solidarity plan. If you want to kick us off, Katie.
Absolutely.
As I play from start, here we go.
So we knew this was not going to be an easy task for companies across the board, no matter what industry. Just from a starting point, Lee and I have worked with our team. Our team has been great with coming up with this 30, 60, 90-day plan that we think will actually help people move forward in the process. We actually started the plan right after the George Floyd murder and all of the uprising that happened after that. So starting with 30 days, and we think it's really important if you are a company, a business, whatever the case may, organization, to acknowledge the Black Lives Matter movement, internally and externally. It is so critical that you let your Black employees know that their lives matter. Like I said before, this is not a political issue, it is a human rights issue, and the Black Lives Matter movement has always been a human rights issue. It doesn't say other lives do not matter, it says that Black lives matter, the people that are being affected for the past 400 years within this country. So making sure that you speak out about that. Starting an open dialogue, I think it's critical to have conversations with your Black employees. They're going to let you know what the temperament is. They're going to let you know what some of their challenges that they're having internally, also externally. Let them speak about their experiences that they've had outside of the workplace. That'll give you a sense of just how they're living their daily lives and what they bring into the workplace. Sometimes it's really heavy. So when Arthur was talking about, being stopped by the police for, driving a nice car or walking into a grocery store and being followed around, those have a huge impact on people's day-to-day lives and their psyche. So I think it's really important to have those conversations so that you understand where people are coming from so you can meet them where they are. Thirdly is to examine your core values. I know a lot of companies have core values, diversity, inclusion, and equity. If it's not already a part of your core values, it needs to be. It's so important to make sure that you have a culture that includes everyone, and that the equity piece, I know it's not talked about a lot, but there has to be a place where people feel like they are being compensated for what they are worth. And I know a lot of times when you have people of color that come into the workplace, especially women, they are paid far less to do the exact same job as other people in that role. So it's really critical to make sure that you're evaluating your core values. Report the data. You have to know where there's a starting point. You have to know where you are so that you can progress and move forward. So all agencies, I know a lot of companies, businesses, I know a lot of, there's actually an Instagram page that actually breaks down the data for major brands across the country. You can actually see, what their board looks like, their executive team, their management team. It's important for us to know the data so that we can make sure that we're moving and progressing in the right direction. State your commitment. This is so important for a lot of companies to make sure that you know exactly what you're committing to. A lot of us have said, of course, this is not about shaming anyone. It's not about a cancel culture. It really is about, this is where I am, and this is what I'm willing to commit to. I know that all of us who are, COVID has happened. Can we hire today? A lot of people, probably not. I know that we as an agency, we're not hiring anyone this year. So a lot of people are at that point. It's okay, but just make sure that you have a proper plan in place and a commitment statement that says, this is how we can help right now. And then, of course, number 6 is sign the Act in Solidarity pledge and commit to change. This is important. When you actually sign a pledge, there's nothing that says, we're not asking you to, spill any blood whatsoever and sign it off. We really just want you to commit to something, to say that you are going to make a change, because that allows everyone that you're fighting for and that you're acknowledging that, you know what, we're moving forward. We know that we weren't with you before, but now we are moving and taking action in solidarity. So that is the 30 days. That is the commitment that we're hoping that people can commit to. As we move into 60 days, focus on that commitment. Are there any gaps that you're missing? We know that there's always things that are happening. Of course, COVID happened, and then we had to reassess, what's happening within our businesses. It's really important that we're making sure that in these phases, this is a great opportunity to start reaching out and creating that network of people so you can start thinking about your next hire. If you do have Black employees within your organization, how do we retain them? How do we connect with them again to let them know that they're a valued asset to our company? And then what does our next promotion look like? Do we need to make sure that we're not just thinking about people that we've normally promoted in the past because of maybe we have a great social relationship with them, or we actually spend time with them after hours? That doesn't always happen for Black employees, where they're able to have some sort of camaraderie or relationship with their employees because maybe they're not on the golf course, or maybe they're not playing tennis or a part of this country club. So you have to really reassess that. And then what does that commitment really look like for them? The reevaluation of all your processes across the board, especially within your human resources department, is critical. Your hiring practices, why are we here today? What have we done wrong? And how can we make this right? I think Lee was very, very open when she said, you know what, I'm gonna hire someone to help us with this. If you have to hire someone to come in and help you with this process, do it. We don't all have the answers, so it's not like you're in this alone. There's a lot of resources out there, and there's more people than you know that are out there that want to help you get this right. And then representation is important. It's critical that you make sure that if you're in any sort of industry and you know that you have a problem with diversity, your website, your social media, everything that's literally out there that is a representation of your brand or your company is a reflection of who you are. And if people don't see themselves, I love what Beyonce says, you can't be what you can't see. So I always like to push that message forward to people, but representation is very important and needs to be reassessed. And that can be done within the 60-day process.
So picking up from there for the 90 days, the overhaul your company-wide behavioral code of conduct. I think this goes a lot back to a lot of the conversations we've had so far, like how do you handle things like microaggressions? What would you do if, one of your employees felt disrespected in any way from a client or another employee, and just having very specific practices and making sure that they're in writing and so that they become universal and completely upheld, and that your team members are aware and that HR really enforces it. Diversifying vendors, as Katie mentioned, a lot of people might not be hiring right now, especially during these, challenging economic times, but all businesses are spending money somewhere. So whether it's, vendors or contractors or partners in any way, and starting to think about really how you're incorporating, looking at new businesses that you can be working with, and really seeking out those other companies instead of just doing, things the way that you always have done. And, another practice too could be spending money with Black-owned businesses and being very intentional about that. Also, as she mentioned, for us, it was hiring a consultant was important, that, we had this plan in front of us and we were getting to work on it. And I just still felt like there was probably a lot of other blind spots that we weren't even aware of, that, having a consultant come in, we uncovered a lot of them pretty quickly, and it just helped us expedite the process. But I also don't think it's necessary to start the process or to even make some really amazing actionable steps. So, I would encourage that people don't let it hinder you if that's not something that your organization is capable of, or if it's not in the budget, you're too small. But then there's just more research that needs to be done to, figure out all those other great resources that are already out there. And recalibrating the talent pipeline. I know we talked about this a lot today, but just being really conscious of when you're posting positions, that it's not just a push, but you're also doing a really great pull in for all talent. And then checking in on your Black community. I know that Arthur mentioned just being very intentional about checking in with your staff members, checking with your community members and friends and partners, and see how they're doing, and also see how you're doing, and getting some real feedback. And then mental health resources. I mean, this year has been challenging enough with everything that's going on. And then, as Katie mentioned, how many people are coming to the workforce right now not fully themselves, because of all the stress and the weight of everything else that's happening. And so if you can provide mental resources, a lot of group health insurance plans already incorporate things like, you know, free therapy sessions and other things, and you can make your team much more aware of that. And there's also some really great resources online right now for free resources for Black professionals in the workplace that you could point your team members and other colleagues to those resources. And as always, Katie and I are happy to help in any way, answer any questions. I just met Arthur today, but I have no doubt that he would be willing to do the same. And if anyone has any great ideas, and we can, we'd love to continue to add to this plan and continue to grow it past the 90-day mark.
Thank you guys for sharing that. And again, this will be recorded. I just wanted to let people know, so I know if you have to jump off before we get to these questions, you will be able to see this, and you can also go through the Act in Solidarity plan again. So we do have two questions that I wanted to touch on. Our first one is, how do you address microaggressions after your initial report of microaggressions was dismissed? Who would like to take this one?
I'll actually take it. I think that sometimes Black professionals have to really evaluate whether that environment is suited for them. If your microaggression complaints are constantly being dismissed, it's probably not the right environment for you. It's something that I think a lot of companies are really trying to get right, but if they're not there, your mental health is so much more important than that job that you're in. So my recommendation is, if it is not addressed a second time, you make the complaint and it's not addressed again, you might want to think about, you know, taking your talents elsewhere where you're valued and you don't feel like you're literally being treated, you know, badly every single day because of these microaggressions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Katie. Our last question here is, so should the term culture fit be re-examined? I never thought about it, but it seems like a small yet detrimental way to hinder change. Arthur, do you
Rid of it.
Well, I would say, like, let's just kind of reframe it into like culture add.
Yes.
You know, it's not to say like, you know, fit is somewhat important. It's, you know, it's unrealistic to say fit is entirely irrelevant. It is important, but we also have to kind of think about what kind of added value the person has, you know. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. I want to thank each and every one of you. Katie, Arthur, Lee, thank you so much for being here, for dedicating your time and energy to doing this. Thank you for everyone who has been with us today. I can't echo this enough, but it will be recorded. Please, please share this with your friends, community, managers, colleagues, because, you know, just echoing again, it's now about taking action. So there's, you know, we can have thoughts, we can have prayers, we can have intention, but it's now taking actionable steps to bring about change. So thank you again. And I guess before we leave, if there's any last words from any of our speakers for our attendees today, maybe let's start with you, Arthur. What is one like step for someone today to take?
Just really think about what actual, you know, what concrete actions you can take. You know, just that for today, like no excuse, just think about what exactly can I do today to address, you know, systemic racism, or how I can play a role in that.
Thank you. Katie?
I think for all business owners that are out there, this is really to you. Allow yourself some grace. Everyone's not going to get it right. We're not all in the same position. We're all moving forward with the same goal. Allow yourself some grace and surround yourself with a support system so that you're able to move forward and actually take the action steps that are necessary for, you know, equality for all.
Thank you. Lee?
And I would say you all already took the first step because you dedicated an hour for this discussion today. So thank you to everyone who did that. And Also, just do one thing that makes you uncomfortable, but is moving towards the work. So, you know, whatever that first step is, whether it's that introspection piece, the vulnerability piece, or, you know, reading a book that you wouldn't normally read, or attending an event you wouldn't normally attend, just something that starts to really open up your boundaries.
Amazing. All right. Thank you all. Thank you for everyone joining. And I hope you have a great rest of your day and you take action.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Nicole.
you.
Bye, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.